Good morning. Good morning. If you want to come in and have a seat.
Come on, Josiah. Have a seat with us.
There are pages right next to Kaylee, or she moved them into it. If you haven't gotten one, what is a holiday? Okay, good. Holiday. No, I mean polity. I'm about to tell you that. It is not a made up. Let me, it's not a made up word. What'd you say?
Polite policy.
That's right. If you take polite policies and mix them together, you get polity. Let me open this in prayer. Father in heaven, we do thank you for today. We rejoice in your goodness and your mercy. We are thankful for this, even this last week, and just the time we got to spend with family and friends. Lord, would you just bless our time now as we come and talk more about your church? We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so polity, what is our polity? Polity is a real word. It's not a fake made-up word, and it's not a mixture of polity and polite, or policy and polite. What is our polity? Polity, in essence, just means, I mean, I'm sure there is some derivative of it from politics. Yeah, but it's our form of church government. What is our form of church government? And to kind of understand this and begin to engage with this, I keep making sure Michael doesn't have any questions. No, we're good. Okay.
I have about 5 already.
Okay, good. What are the different kinds of church government? And there may be different ones than this, but we're going to talk about 3 main ones. The first is the Episcopal form of church government. Examples of this are Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Anglican, some Methodist denominations. The Episcopal system, the authority is centralized in a hierarchy of bishops or popes who oversee the church with a region or diocese. In essence, we can say it this way: it is a top-down model. You have the Pope at the top for the Roman Catholic Church. For other denominations, it's a bishop. And then you go on down from there. You have regional bishops. You have someone who's over those regional bishops, and it goes down and down. Everything flows from the top down. Kind of the far opposite side of this would be a congregational church. Now, a congregational church or system of government is the decision-making or authority is in the hands of the local church congregation. Each church is autonomous and governs itself without external oversight. So Baptist churches, independent churches, a lot of evangelical churches tend to be congregationalist. It has a lot of the downfalls of a congregational church is that the pastor tends to be CEO, and there are a lot of pitfalls that can fall in that system. Somewhere between Episcopal, where you have one man in charge at the top and everything flows down, which is a problem, and congregational, where you can have one man in a local congregation controlling things, you have the Presbyterian form of church government. Presbyterian system emphasizes rule by elders. The elder is called, the Greek word is presbyter, or from presbyteros. They're elected by the congregation to lead, make decisions. The authority is shared across local, regional, and national levels. So you, on the offices of the church then, we have 3, we'll talk about the deacon in a minute, but you have the elder, 2 types of elders: teaching elder, which is the pastor. You have the ruling elder, which is the lay leader. Equal authority and governance. You have 3 levels: the session, the presbytery, the general assembly. So the session being the local church, the presbytery being a region, and the general assembly being the national group of churches. Those are kind of the 3, and we're going to dive more into the specifics of Presbyterian church government. Before we go forward, any questions about those 3 forms of church government?
What are some of the pros and cons of each?
So, When you talk about an Episcopal system, I guess if there's going to be a pro, it's going to be the flow of funds, right? They're going to be able to do a lot more because everything's collected centrally and then dispersed outward. You're having less of an issue. If you get a small rural church, you're going to have less of issues with funding and stuff like that. The problem is the authority of the church ultimately lies in one person. The Pope, in essence, in a lot of instances, is put on the same level as God. If he sits on his throne and speaks ex cathardo, however you say it, it is as if he's speaking the word of the Lord. That's risen for a lot of heresy rises up in that. There still is a form of connectionalism there, but it's really not connectionalism. It's we're over here, right?
Would it be fair to say that the church members don't get to choose their
No, they absolutely don't. So
That's a big con.
it's a big con. Yeah, the priests are appointed. There's no calling and electing of pastors or anything like that. The opposite of that is in the congregational system. You have the authority is in the church. The problem with that is there is no checks and balances. If a church goes haywire, then no one's going to come in and say, a church or even a pastor goes haywire. No one's has the authority to come in and say stop. So there is no checks and balances in that situation. There is the bonus is that you do have more autonomy, so you get to choose who comes in and out.
And then the congregation makes a lot of the decisions.
A lot of decisions on everything, finances,
Everything is
property.
very democratic.
It's very democratic in that sense. Yeah. Okay.
You can ask my
No,
questions then.
so I was raised Episcopalian,
Yes.
and you had mentioned, we have bishops.
Right.
And we have priests, but we as a congregation had a governing body.
Okay.
And we, if a priest was called to our church, we would have to approve of them. And we'd have to talk about it.
Okay.
And so
The-
there was some form of congregation.
Congregation. So when we say Episcopal, that's different than the Episcopal Church specifically.
Okay.
It's a form of church. So a lot of things fall under Episcopal. Eastern Orthodox are Episcopal church government. Roman Catholic is an Episcopal form of church government.
Okay.
So it's not by now. And Episcopal tends to be the same way. There may be nuances across,
Yeah.
like you said there, which would have been different with Roman Catholic. I believe they don't have any say of where a guy comes. But so yeah, when I say Episcopal, it's I'm using that much more broadly, not specifically to the Episcopal congregation. If that makes sense. Yeah. The other way you could say it, to be less confusing, would be a hierarchical form of church government. And then Presbyterians, there is no downside. We're just no. So the good thing, I think the positives of being Presbyterian are the connection. Well, we're going to go into that. I don't want to bury the lead because I'm about to go to where I think some of the strengths are.
Some, I guess, Baptists, some of the pastors take care of the money and everything.
Yes, in some congregational churches, I would say, instead of just framing it as Baptist, I would say congregational churches.
Yeah.
There's some that the pastor does everything. So he becomes CEO. He is the decision making.
Treasury and
Yeah, everything, which could be very problematic. Yeah,
You talk about how the Baptist church is like autonomous.
yeah.
So what is that Baptist?
The Southern Baptist Convention,
Yeah, what is
yes.
that?
That's something they're part of, and it's something that they have resources through, but it can't tell any specific church to do anything. There's no real authority in the Southern Baptist Convention. There is some, and I won't know all of this. I know that they do a lot of missional work through the Southern Baptist Convention and other things. So it's joint venture kind of stuff that they do together, but there is no authority through those bodies. So if they,
So I guess the only authority would be if the church goes way off the rails, they can be disfellowshipped.
they can be no longer allowed in the Southern Baptist Convention, but there's nothing that they can specifically do.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So what are the distinctives of a Presbyterian form of church government? We've talked about it some, but I want to talk about it more in depth. Again, rule by elder, the presbyter, The term means elder, comes from the Greek word presbyteros, as I said, meaning older or mature person, is referring to the church leader. There are two offices of elders, the teaching elder and the ruling elder. Share responsibility of spiritual oversight. Acts 14:23, and when they appointed elders for them in every church with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So we see here the pattern of the Bible was to appoint multiple elders, not a single elder, in every place that they were, a church was put up. So rule by elders. There's a plurality and parity of elders. What do we mean by that? Plurality, that's a simple word. What do we mean by plurality? Multiple. No single elder, including the pastor, has a supreme authority. It's shared among a group of elders, ensuring accountability, wisdom, and governance. Acts 20:17, Paul calls them the elders of the church. At Ephesus, he tells them to shepherd the church of God. We always see multiple elders doing that work. There's authority in councils and assemblies. So the Presbyterian system operates with a series we call councils or assemblies, or courts is a word that was often used for that. And there are three courts of the Presbyterian Church, the session. So what is the session? The session is made up of all the ruling elders and teaching elders of any specific local church body. So here in this church, your session is made up of Alan, Mark, and myself. Those are the three elders, the session of the church. So the session, as we are a single body, then we have the presbytery. The presbytery becomes there are regional boundaries that are set by the General Assembly. So for our church, we're in Evangel Presbytery. It extends as far, I guess you would say, east as Oxford, I think is our furthest one east. Oxford or Anniston is our furthest east one. I think we extend to the Georgia border, but we don't have any churches further than those two churches. We are about as south as Bessemer, about as north as Gardendale. I'm not exactly sure how west we extend, but it's not too far. We are basically the greater Birmingham area. That is Evangel Presbytery. Alabama itself has 4 presbyteries. We have the Gulf Coast Presbytery, Warrior Presbytery, Evangel, and then Covenant, which is in the north. Just an interesting note, I'm not a member of Lakewood Presbyterian Church. I'm a member of Evangel Presbytery. That's where my membership lies as a pastor. And that's for multiple reasons. So the church calls me, the session approves me, but as a member, so I have no vote as a member of the church. If we have a congregational meeting, I don't vote for things of the church. I do have a vote on the session, and particularly in instances of ties. But for the session, or for the presbytery, we meet 4 times a year, and we deal with different issues. We deal with, if there are any specific church issues that get appealed to the presbytery, we deal with those. We have our own committees, and Mission to America, Mission North America, credentialing, which I'm the chair of, and others, administration, so on and so forth. And so we meet 4 times a year. We do the work of the local presbytery. You can think about it, the presbytery as a type, if you were to think about it in regards to our national government. The church would be maybe like the city, the presbytery would be the state. You're thinking about the different levels. It's not exact one-to-one, I'm just trying to give you an idea.
So the elders are your House of Representatives?
Sure, if you want to say that. But there are different levels. So, there's the state house and then there's the federal house. And it's not exactly, we don't elect people to the different things. So I go to presbytery, I also go to General Assembly, so we have representatives from all our churches.
Do you go into how elders are appointed, or?
We're going to, yeah.
So, when you go to presbytery from each church, is any elder from any church in that presbytery eligible to vote in the presbytery?
So every teaching elder is eligible to vote. Every ruling elder, so each church gets a minimum of 2 ruling elders, and then for every 500 members above the base, which I think is 250, you get another ruling elder. So just like you would think about our House of Representatives, the bigger state you are, the more House of Representatives, the more you get in the House. So the same is true for a church. But any number of teaching elders are always, because we're members of the presbytery, we all can go vote at a given. And now, as far as who can vote at a given presbytery meeting, for our church it's easy because we have two. So they're always able to go and vote. If we had more, then at a presbytery meeting, we would say, okay, at a session meeting, this presbytery is coming up, who would like to go? And you set it at that. So then, once that's set for the next presbytery meeting, only those two elders can be the ones who vote, as appointed by the session. And then once a year, we have General Assembly. This year it'll be in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the General Assembly is representatives from all the presbyteries. So again, each church is allowed, it's the same as far as ruling elders, all teaching elders are allowed to go, and we deal with national business. So sometimes we have different committees, a lot of the same committees. Some of the big stuff that we do is overtures. If there's questions that are coming out of presbyteries about needing changes to our book of church order, or big issues that have come up in the denomination, they come through overtures. We have the Judicial Commission of our National General Assembly, which will deal with appeals. If something, let's just say, I'll use Mark as an example, because he probably won't mind. Let's say Mark goes crazy, and we try him here at the church level, and we find him guilty, and he doesn't agree with that, he can appeal to the presbytery. Let's say the presbytery gets involved, and they find him guilty still, he can still appeal even further to the General Assembly. And that's when the Judicial Commission would then hear the case and hear the appeal. So there is a series of appeals as the court system goes up. And that's good. So some scriptural support, Acts 15:1, the Jerusalem Council is a key example of the collective decision making by church leaders, apostles, and elders gathered to resolve doctrinal issues. We see in 1 Corinthians 12:28, amongst other things, the apostles, others, one of the roles God has appointed in the church is administrating various kinds of the giftedness of the church and other things. And so we have authority in councils and assemblies, yes.
What did you say, 1 Corinthians what?
12:28.
12:28.
Yes, 12:28. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Another, I think, positive of Presbyterian is the connectionalism or mutual accountability. Again, we talked about this. We are not independent. We are part of a larger structure. We are accountable to our presbytery. The presbyteries are accountable to the General Assembly. And that's a good thing, so that I can't just start preaching whatever I want from this pulpit. We can't teach whatever we want from this church. One of the beautiful things is even if, let's just say, because I'm charismatic and people love me. Let's just say I have, y'all look at it and you go, wow, he just has the elders just bewitched. And he's preaching heresy. You as a church member can appeal to the presbytery against the session and say, I don't believe what's going on here is right. And as members of the church, you have the right of appeal to say, we need the presbytery to step in because we believe that they're preaching and teaching and promoting heresy. It's a beautiful system, I believe, for checks and balances, so that we don't have any one person.
How does one do that, though?
You would,
I don't, like,
yeah.
I'm not saying, I understand how.
Yeah, no. So, typically if you had something and,
Telephone call.
yeah, you would go to the clerk of the presbytery. So every presbytery, at every level we have two offices.
So I just Google the presbytery.
Well, you could, but like at the end of the day, let's say you didn't want to come to me because, well, I think Daniel's a problem, the session's a problem, and I'm going to ask for the clerk of the presbytery, and you don't want to do that. The easiest way to do it, and I'll just tell you, here's the cheat code, just call it the Presbyterian Church.
Oh, okay.
And just be like, hey, if you're trying to find out who the clerk of the presbytery is, there's ways to find that out.
Oh, okay.
And you can search Evangel Presbyterian, you can find our website, and I haven't been there in a while, but there may be an email from the clerk of the presbytery.
Oh, okay.
But so every level there's a moderator and a clerk. So I'm the moderator of our session, Alan's the clerk. For Evangel Presbytery,
Okay.
Chris Peters is the moderator, and Ken, I lost his last name, but it's Ken, keep wanting to say Ken Johnson, but I know that's not right. That's Ken and Connie. It's gonna eat my head up, but it's fine. You could just email him and be like, hey, there's a problem, and I'd like to file an appeal. How do I do that?
Oh,
Yeah. Or file a complaint.
File a complaint.
Yeah, file a complaint. And it wouldn't be appeal unless there was.
oh.
Yeah. Election of leaders by the congregation. Elders are chosen by the congregation, reflecting the biblical principle of congregational participation in leadership selection. So in Acts 6, with the deacons, we see the apostles direct the congregation to choose 7 men to serve as deacons, showing that the church participates in this process. In 1 Timothy, we see that Paul lays forth, 1 Timothy 3, all the qualifications. And I think there's a reason why we have those qualifications. There's an assumption that we are the ones who need to identify these individuals in the church, and then we vote on them as church officers. So that's true of our elders, and that's true of our deacons. The authority of Christ as the head of the church is one of the things we emphasize. Christ alone is the head of the church. All authority exercised by the elders is derived and is accountable to Christ. Ephesians 1:22 through 23, he put all things under his feet, that is Christ, and gave him as head over all things to the church. Colossians 1:18, and he is the head of the body, the church. So Christ is the head of the church. The strengths of the Presbyterian system is biblical plurality, avoids excessive concentration of power in one individual, accountability, our different courts ensure checks and balances within leadership, and unity reflects the interconnectedness of the early church as we see in Acts. We are meant to be connected and to submit to one another as the church. All right. Any questions up to this point?
I think it might be helpful also if you explain that we have a committee of presbytery that does take care of church issues, pastor issues, those kinds of, can you talk about that?
Yes, so one of our committees we have for the presbytery is one called, for us, it's called Church and Pastor Care. So their responsibilities are multiple. Any people we have laboring out of bounds or out of jurisdiction of a church. So there are different calls. So I'm called to this church. This is my call. But some people work with mission agencies or missional organizations, and they have not a call from a specific church. So they're laboring out of bounds or laboring out of jurisdiction. They have the Church and Pastor Care becomes their session. They report to them. They care for them. I put that in quotes. It's not exactly the same thing. But also, if there is a complaint filed to the presbytery about a minister, it would go through the Church and Pastor Care. A commission would be appointed to investigate, and all those kind of things. So there's mechanisms, committees, commissions, and then if necessary, we don't have a standing judicial committee or commission for the presbytery, but those are appointed as needed. So for the denomination, we do have a standing judicial commission, but not, people roll off of it there's on a term basis. I don't know exactly what it is, but every few years, people have to be renominated and put back on it. So there's a constant rotation of people. But in instances where things come up through the year, we need to have that commission in place. So they are set for a set time to hear any cases, because we only meet once a year.
I guess it's fair to say that 99% of the work is done in committee,
Yes.
both presbytery and general assembly, because like general assembly, you got 3 days
Yes.
basically.
To do a lot of work.
So 99% of the work's got to be done in those committees.
Yes. And you could argue one of the negative sides, or if you want to give it a knock, and it can be frustrating at times, is the slow nature of the Presbyterian form of church government. And it is at times laborious and can be frustrating, because if something, if we're at a general assembly and someone says, hey, this isn't worked out, we need to table this, that means we're tabling it till next year. That's the end, ends up being the end result, because there is no business that goes on outside of, we have some permanent committees that are constantly meeting, but they can't even, unless they're a commission. I keep saying this, and I probably should define this. What's the difference between a committee and a commission? A committee investigates and reports, but but they can't act. A commission is given the power to act. So a judicial commission can actually carry out whatever they're going to do. If they need to do discipline, they can do discipline. We don't have, aside from the judicial commission, we have no standing commissions. They're all committees. So we can give something to a committee, but then they have to come back and report on it at the next presbytery. The next general assembly. Oftentimes jokes are made about Presbyterians. Says if you want to get something done, you have to make a committee to do it. And while that is at times true, it also is a good thing, I think, because it gets more ears and more eyes on issues as they're coming through, that no one person ends up deciding everything. And really, even as a church, and we do have committees, they don't currently function as well as they have in the past. We're working on that. But it gives you a voice too, because you as church members get to be members of the committees. And if you are on a committee and y'all meet together and you send a report to the session, most of our courts follow Robert's rules. And if let's say Mark wanted to do something, he can bring it up at the session meeting, but it requires a second. If he says, I want to do, I don't know, I want to paint the walls pink, he could make that motion. It would require a second. Things come from our committees not requiring seconds. Now, because, and you have to have an elder over each committee, and we like to have a deacon on each committee as well, that work comes on the floor, in essence. It has to be talked about by the session. That's true on every level. When as a member of the credentials committee, when I bring our report, we don't need seconds for the things that we're recommending. They will be discussed. Now that doesn't mean they have to vote yes on them. If, Mark has a church painting wall committee, and I'm being silly a little bit, and they comes and it doesn't need a second, that doesn't mean we have to vote yes to make those things pink. But it does give a voice to everybody in the church. So as you hear about committees, you should serve on them. They're a good thing.
Just to add on to that, I mean, to give it a more concrete example, like we have a worship committee.
Yes.
And part of that is maybe choosing some music. And so if they want to add a song or take away a song, they make that recommendation in a report to the session. And then the session ends up approving or disapproving that.
Be very careful about recommending our songs, because I'll make you lead them. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Any other comments, questions? I do want to go a little bit more in depth too now about what is the role of the elder and the deacon. We're going to start with the deacon. The deacon has several different roles, and these are just some of them. This is probably not even all of them, but I want to give you an idea of what the deacon. The deacon, again, as with the elder, is elected and appointed by the church, nominated, trained, voted on, ordained as an office of the church. Theirs is a ministry of mercy and service. They're tasked with caring for the poor, the sick, the elderly, others in needs, including and providing material and emotional support for those in needs. You could look at Acts 6. Again, that's when the deacons were appointed, and for the purpose that they're appointed. You could look at Romans 12:13, that it is right for us to contribute to the needs of the saints and show hospitality. You could look at James 1:27, religion that is pure and undefiled before the God the Father is this, to visit orphans, widows in their affliction. So the deacons have a ministry of mercy and service. They also have a ministry of stewardship and administration. The deacons are to oversee church resources. This includes finances, property, benevolence funds, to ensure that the church resources are used wisely and effectively to support its mission. Again, we look at 2 Corinthians 8:1-7. Paul commends the church for their generosity and stewardship. 1 Peter 4:10, as each has received gifts used to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied graces. And so the deacon is to administer stewardship and I should say, John's not here today, but Rusty, Jacob, and John are your three deacons here as a church. They're to support the worship and practical needs of the church. They're to assist in the practical functioning of the church. This might include preparing the church for worship services. So when we talk about preparing the church, setting up chairs at times, making sure that, and as we will be moving to back to collecting the offering, making sure that's done and ready to be done. It might also include at times aiding in the Lord's Supper when needed, and supporting the hospitality ministries of the church, things like church fellowship, Wednesday nights, and those other things. They should be encouraging generosity. Deacons encourage the congregation to give generously, fostering a spirit of stewardship and gratitude. You could look at 2 Corinthians 9:6-7. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he's decided in his heart. They are to be about the work of mobilizing the for congregational care. They're responsible for encouraging the church to serve one another and the wider community. It might involve coordinating service projects, disaster relief efforts, or care teams, so on and so forth. If you look at the qualification to be a deacon, you can find that in 1 Timothy 3:8-13. And some of the things it says there is they need to be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to too much wine, not greedy, must hold the faith with a clear conscience, must live their lives with integrity, and their families should be well managed. So that is the deacon. Any questions about the office of the deacon?
What about visiting the sick, the shut-in, is that a both deacon and elder?
It is, and we're going to talk about the elder in a second, and I'll mention some of that stuff. But yeah, certainly ministry of mercy and service. They need to take care of the poor and the sick, and you can't take care of the poor and the sick if you're not visiting the poor and the sick. So that's an important work, I think, of the deacon as well. The elder is to exercise, in contrast, spiritual oversight. They're responsible for shepherding the spiritual well-being of the congregation. They're to oversee the preaching and teaching of the word. They're to oversee the administration of the sacraments and the discipline of the church. Some places you can go for this: Acts 20:28, as well as 1 Peter 5:2-3. They are to focus on leadership and governance. They are the governing body of the local church. They can make and should make decisions about church ministry, worship, and discipline. They approve and oversee the work of church committees and ministries. They determine how the church fulfills its mission and vision, and they administer church discipline and loving fairness. They are to be responsible for teaching and preaching. Teaching elders, often referred to as the pastors or ministers of the word and sacrament, are responsible for the regular preaching, teaching, and administering of the sacraments, while all elders provide spiritual oversight. Teaching elders are particularly devoted to the ministry of the word. Again, Ephesians 4:11-12, he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for work of ministry. 2 Timothy 4:2, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with complete patience and teaching. So they focus on teaching and preaching. And then shepherding and counseling. Elders provide pastoral care for members of the congregation. This includes visiting the sick, encouraging the struggling, and offering counsel to those in need. I've mentioned this several times, but the elder is also in charge of discipline. They're responsible for maintaining the spiritual health of the church through loving biblical discipline. This involves addressing sin within the church, resolving disputes, and protecting the purity of the congregation. It's an important thing. It's a hard thing, but it is an important thing. Understanding that as we do discipline, what is always our goal in discipline? Say again? Restoration. Our first goal is always the glory of God, and the second goal is the restoration of the offending brother or sister. So it's one of the things that the elders of the church should be doing. We've already kind of looked at this, but they represent church at the higher courts, ruling elders and teaching elders, go to presbyteries, general assemblies, and where decisions affecting the broader church are made. It demonstrates Presbyterian principles connectionalism, where local churches are accountable to one another. Again, qualifications for elders can be found in 1 Timothy 3:1-7. They must be above reproach, self-controlled, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, manage their own household well. They are distinct, or there are distinctions, as we said, between the teaching elder and ruling elder on teaching elder focuses on teaching, preaching. The ruling elder focuses on governance, pastoral care, and representing the congregation in the courts.
Can you talk a little about the difference between assistant pastor, associate pastor, and then maybe somebody who's under care?
Yes. So, starting with someone who's under care, when a candidate, we'll call him a candidate, or an individual, a young man, is identified as someone who might do well or has at least expressed a desire to go into ministry, they first come under the care of the session. What is that saying? The session is saying, we understand that you have a desire to go into ministry. We want to help you test those desires and to work through those desires. And so you come under the care of the session. The session will then recommend that that man come under the care of the presbytery, where he comes under the care of the presbytery as a whole for the same purpose and the same ends. He has to go through an internship. This is where Trey is at right now. And to exercise, test, and to feel out that giftedness. The coming under care does not guarantee that you'll ever become a pastor. It is a testing period to say, is this something that I'm gifted at, or is this not something that I'm gifted at? It's meant to be a season of testing, so that we're not throwing guys into the pastorate who are not ready or not able to do those things. If a man comes through all that and he's done all that he is required, he then can seek a call from a church to be a minister. We have 3, and some argue that we should only have 2, but we have 3. Calls that, technically we have 4. One is of an evangelist. I'm not going to deal with evangelists because that has nothing to do with the church, local church. But someone could be called to do an evangelist and do evangelistic ministry. A given church has the pastor, that's the head pastor, assistant pastor, and associate pastor. The assistant pastor is not voted on by the congregation. They are voted on by the session, and the session might bring on a man. He has no voting rights on the session. He can attend and even be asked for his advice if he has them, but he is not a voting member of the session. That's the assistant pastor. He's called by the session and therefore can be released by the session. An associate pastor is called and voted on by the church, so by the whole congregation. He is a voting member of the session and can only be released by a vote of the church. So that is the major difference between an assistant and an associate. There are some, even in our own denomination, who argue that we should not have the assistant role. And the reason for that is you're asking a man to come in and minister to a church, and they're not even voting on saying that we will do that. And that they see that as an important distinction. Why do we have the assistant role? In larger churches, it became easier. For us, it's not an issue. When you look at a place like Briarwood, that I don't know how many different assistant pastors they have, but it's got to be like 35, 40. It's high. And if you're having to deal with putting together a search committee and voting as a church every time one of these guys, because a lot of these guys will come in for 3 or 4 years, they're out of seminary, they fill in a role, and then a church calls them to be a head pastor somewhere, and they're leaving. And so can be a lot of turnover. And so the assistant position was created to help in those kind of situations where it became more difficult. I think one of the negatives is that a lot of these churches are never having guys come as associates anymore. They just are doing assistants. And there's more and more I'm hearing people talk about how that's probably not a good thing, because there should be the church saying, yes, we are willing to submit to you. And that doesn't happen when an assistant is called versus an associate. So those are the kind of the different church relationships.
They're just like in Briarwood, they're called specific roles within the
Yes.
church.
Yeah.
Especially in the larger churches.
Yeah. It really is for the larger churches.
It's for larger churches.
But a lot of smaller churches, like so 200-300 member churches, have just skipped over associates altogether. And it's just easier they can call in a guy, and then if it doesn't work out, they can get rid of him, and it becomes easier. So it's become, I think it was put in for a very good reason, and maybe that we're using it too often to not bring guys in as associates, which when we should be doing that. But that's part of the nature of Presbyterianism. If we don't like something, we can change it. It just takes votes and stuff. And I've talked about, I've kind of done all this already, but which is one of the beautiful parts about our courts. Again, the three courts, Session, Presbyterian, General Assembly. So let's say, I just want to kind of walk you through an example of how this can work. Let's say I just said this here today, and you're like, you know what, Daniel's right, we really shouldn't have assistants, and we want to change it. And let's say y'all came to the session, someone came to the session, Rusty, because it was Rusty's passionate about this kind of things, I know he is. At the next session meeting, he says, you know what, after hearing Daniel talk about some of the pros and cons of assistants, I think we should change our BCO. I would like to recommend that you write an overture to the presbytery doing that. And so we could, and Mark and Alan were both like, you know what, we think you're right too, Rusty, and let's just say we all got behind it. And we took time and we wrote an overture, and you write it out, and you give your reasoning, and we can say, we want to change this part of the BCO to remove assistant, so that we'll only have associate ministers that are called. We could give that to the presbytery, and let's just say the presbytery goes, they can do one of two things. They go, yeah, this is not an issue, and they can vote it down, that's where it dies. Or they could say, yes, we agree too, they can make some changes, and then they can send it on to the General Assembly. When we meet at the General Assembly here in June, that overture would come before the Overtures Committee, and let's just say they go, you know what, we agree with this too. Then it would go to the floor for a vote, and it would be either voted up or down. And that's how things, I mean, every year we do this. Just at our last presbytery meeting, we voted on this last year's changes to the BCO. I'll tell you, this year they were all kind of boring. Sometimes it's exciting changes, or not exciting, but like they're more controversial, or should we or shouldn't we, or is this wise or not wise? A lot of the changes this year were just like, I don't know, how would you characterize them? They were
Somewhat controversial, but most of them were,
I didn't think they were
Fairly
controversial at all.
well, the one about who can be a witness in a trial.
Oh, I'm talking about last presbytery, the ones that we actually voted on.
Oh, I thought you meant general.
No. So like at our last presbytery meeting,
Oh, yeah.
we voted on like 4 or 5.
Yeah,
And they were all kind of,
they were all unanimous, weren't they?
yeah, they were all unanimous,
Yeah.
except for maybe
And
abstentions.
One guy said,
You can abstain, and I think we had a few abstentions. But they were kind of like just clarifying language or making language more,
yeah,
less clunky or whatever. So a lot of times that's what it is. But then sometimes, what Mark's talking about, one of the ones we didn't even come to us because it lost at the General Assembly level was, I think that's right, lost at the General Assembly level. Who can be a witness in a trial? So if the Judicial Commission has to meet, and who can be a witness at those things? And the way our BCO says right now is that if you're an atheist, you can't be a witness. And the reasoning behind that is, if you can't swear by at least some sort of higher authority, why would we trust that you're going to come before us and not just tell an out-and-out lie? If there's not, and it doesn't mean that you have to be a Christian, just that you have to have a belief in something. So if you're a Hindu or a Muslim or other things, you could testify, but not an atheist. And there's different reasons why it came up, why they wanted to change that language of if there was issues where a medical professional needed to testify in a court situation, but they're an atheist and they would not be allowed to. But then the arguments became, well, that might be true. If there is a situation like that, there's also going to be a civil trial, and all civil evidence is permissible. So there are ways around
and they could
Right.
submit documents.
documents
Just
and other
not-
things, just not in person.
testify.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that came up this year. Okay. Any questions about our church polity? Yeah.
This kind of goes back to the assistant and the associate pastor,
Yeah.
like staff members of church. So like you've got a youth director and a minister of music, or they need to be associate.
So those are just hired positions by the church. So they have nothing to do with the presbytery. The presbytery only is dealing really with called ordination issues. So those the assistant, the associate, the pastor, and the evangelist, which are ordained teaching elder positions, is the only ones that the presbytery deals with. So, and I know a lot of times we use language kind of interchangeably. People have like a minister of music. Oftentimes they're using that, they don't mean ordained. They just kind of use it that way. Or I've found that I often will instruct people to use, if they're not ordained yet, to use the word director because it's less confusing. Because a lot of churches have started doing this where they'll have a guy come on and like, well, he's the pastor of assimilation. And he's working to be ordained, but he's not yet ordained. And I'll always say, because they'll come to me for credentials, so that's why I get a voice in this, I always say, look, I understand that we use language interchangeably and that pastor doesn't necessarily mean ordained. Just change it to director because it'll cost less of a fuss. So it's just easier. Or you think about minister, even in Britain, minister's used for a lot of things. You got
In civil government.
in civil government, yeah, the prime minister. That doesn't mean he's an ordained position. It just is someone in authority. So people use minister that way. Like a music minister is not often an ordained position, but they use the word minister and it can be confusing for people. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it could be, but it's not often. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other closing thoughts, questions? All right. Let me close this in prayer and we'll pick up more next week on, we're going to start moving to what we particularly as a church do here at Lakewood. So, all right, let me close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time. Would you just continue to be with us as we prepare our hearts even now for worship, that all that we do and say would be honoring and pleasing to you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.